Sometimes word problems have more than one unknown, but so far in 7th grade, we only know how to solve equations with one variable, not two different variables. So we need to learn how to express different unknowns in terms of one variable. Let's say that, let's just say that Mr. Ford has twice as much money as Mr. Chevy. So we can see that we don't know Mr. Ford or Mr. Chevy, hence two unknowns. It's important to write them both down. Oops. Now, we can only use one variable to represent both of them. So we ought to think about which one should we have the variable represent. What I want to show you is that almost always, like 95% of the time, it's easiest to have the last one mentioned in the comparison be represented by the variable. And I'll show you why. Mr. Ford has twice as much money as Mr. Chevy. So if I replace Mr. Chevy and say X, I say Ford has twice as much as X. You can see that Ford is 2X. Now, I could have called Mr. Chevy, I could have called Mr. Ford X. But if Mr. Chevy has twice as much, as Mr. Ford has twice as much as Chevy, then I'd have to divide X by 2 to go that way. This way, Mr. Ford, to get, if he's got twice as much as Mr. Chevy, I have to divide by 2. Since the language of the problem sounds like you're multiplying, it works by far the best to have Mr. Chevy be represented by X. Let's do another example. Mary scored 3 points less than twice as many as Mr. Walsh. Mary scored 3 points less than twice as many as Mr. Walsh. So, in words, we have Mary, and we have Mr. Walsh. Oops, not Mr. Mary. Mr. Walsh. Oops. Mr. Walsh is mentioned last, so he will be X. Mary is 3 less than twice as much as X. 3 less than twice as much as X. This becomes very important when we're solving problems with more than one unknown. These are very similar as what I had taught you before with solving word problems in general. You need to read carefully, no matter what the word problem. And in all algebra problems, you should be actually thinking to yourself, how many unknowns, or what is unknown? What is unknown? This is the really key, is unknown. So you have to then write down in words the unknown or unknowns. Assign a variable to represent one unknown. That's like what we were just practicing. Express any others in terms of that variable. In other words, use that variable to show what it would be. Now we write an equation. Solve and check to make sure it's right. Now you very well may want to be doing your homework word problems with this screen showing. Sheet DD40 about Grandpa. It's problem number 8. Grandpa's age is 7 years less than 6 times Junior's. The sum of their ages is 70. Find each of their ages. Okay, so you can see that we have Grandpa and Junior as our unknowns. So that we're going to write down, there are 2 unknowns here because we never know, they never tell us how old either of them is. We have Grandpa and we have Junior. And Junior is mentioned last when they're compared. You can see this is the sentence where they are compared. Junior is X, and Grandpa is 7 less than 6 times Junior, or 7 less than 6 times X. So I start with 6x and I take 7 away because remember that less than business. We got to switch the order. The other thing we know is the sum of their ages is 70. In other words, if I add Grandpa's age to Junior's age, it is 70. And since I have a variable expression for each of these, I've got 6x plus 1x is 7x. Minus 7. That's, I'm adding the variable expressions together. Grandpa is 6x minus 7. Junior is 1x, or x. So I'm adding 6x minus 7 plus 1x to get 7x minus 7. Now I solve. And I find that 77 is 7x. And x is 11. Now you might say, what did I find? And some kids always say x. But remember, we said x was going to represent Junior. So what I've found is that Junior is 11. Now, if I know that Junior is 11, I can do one of 2 things. I can either evaluate this expression and say, we know that Grandpa is 6 times x minus 7, or 66 minus 7, making him, Grandpa, is 59. Or else I could have said the sum of their ages is 70. So if Junior's 11, the rest is 59. Either way, we said that Junior was going to be x, so when I've solved for x, I have Junior as 11. And that's how you do these. If there's more than 2 unknowns, you have to try to find which variable, which unknown the other 2 are compared to, or else you have to just get creative with assigning those. We'll do some of those in class.